Protests always happen for a reason. Protesters always have some sort of demand. What we've seen on the streets of Britain this past week, however, are not protests, and the people taking part in them are not protesters. These are far-right, racist, Islamophobic riots, especially when they involve setting fire to a hotel housing more than 250 immigrants, or surrounding a mosque and forcing worshippers inside to fear for their lives, or just targeting people on the street for violent attack simply for the way they look or dress. Look, there is so much to be said in response to what we've seen in recent days in the UK. The sheer level of violence and intimidation, including attacks on police officers from the same right-wing people who claim to love the police. The complicity from the mainstream media and from social media, which together have fanned the flames of hate, demonized immigrants, incited Islamophobia, even now trying to both sides a shocking wave of far-right political violence. The wholly inadequate response from a Labour government that doesn't want to clearly address the anti-Muslim bigotry that's undeniably at the core of a lot of what we've seen. But what has really stood out to me, and what I really want to point out today, is the sheer hypocrisy from all those people who said after 9/11 that if you mentioned the role of US foreign policy in driving radicalization and pushing people into the arms of Al-Qaeda or ISIS, you were an apologist for terrorism. You were justifying the violence. The people who said after October the 7th that if you mentioned the occupation or the siege of Gaza as a root cause of the violence, you were an apologist for Hamas. You were an excuse maker for the terrorists. And yet suddenly, all those same people now want to talk about root causes, about context, about the underlying issues and legitimate concerns that are driving all of this far-right terrorism. Because that's what this is. That's what we have been witnessing. Far-right domestic terrorism. And yet Douglas Murray, for example, the right-wing pundit who spent years smearing Muslims as apologists for Al-Qaeda or Hamas, he tweeted, quote, "Mass illegal migration turns high-trust societies into low-trust ones. It turns coherent societies into incoherent ones. You can't just address the backlash to that, you have to address the cause. Unless our leaders do that, this will get infinitely worse." Can you imagine what Murray would have said about a Muslim who responded to 9/11 or 7/7 or October the 7th with, "You can't just address the backlash, you have to address the cause"? Ah, the hypocrisy. Lee Anderson, the Reform Party MP and former Conservative Party MP, with a long history of making Islamophobic and racist remarks, he tweeted that, quote, "This problem has been caused by smug politicians who've refused to listen to the concerns of British people." Ah, yes, the concerns of far-right fascists who Lee Anderson outrageously equates with the entire British people. That's what we should be worried about. Look, when we talk about people's concerns, much of them are total BS. People have been lied to, after all. Deliberate misinformation around the nationality and ethnic identity of the suspect in the tragic stabbing in Southport, which left 3 children dead, played a crucial role in fueling the fire that sparked these riots. He wasn't an immigrant who came into the country illegally on a boat, but it was the kind of dangerous misinformation that made it pretty high up the political ladder. Here's the leader of Lee Anderson's Reform Party, the odious Nigel Farage, explaining how he got everything so shamefully wrong.
One of the reasons the Southport riots were as bad as they were is we weren't told the truth. There were stories online from some very prominent folks with big followings, Andrew Tate, etc., suggesting the man had crossed the English Channel in a boat in October 2023. Other suggestions that he was an active Muslim. And much of this led to the riots that we saw.
But you amplified that because you said some reports suggest.
I asked a very simple question. Was this person known or not? Now,
to the security services.
Absolutely.
And that's a perfectly legitimate question, which was raised by Yvette Cooper. But, Nigel
Yes.
Farage, you didn't just do that, did you? You said
Yes.
some reports suggest he was known to the security services. Those reports were from a fake news website, amplified by Russian state TV and, as you mentioned, Andrew Tate. Which ones were you looking at?
You lost me at Andrew Tate, Mr. Farage. Also, going by your standard of what qualifies as credible sourcing, should we also believe Elon Musk when he says a civil war is imminent? Because he has a big following too. You know, I honestly don't know what's been worst about what we've seen in the UK in recent days. The stupidity, the hypocrisy, or the violence that has flown from both. My guest today is an MP, a member of Parliament in the UK, who has labelled these far-right riots for what they are: racist, hateful and Islamophobic. Zarah Sultanah was re-elected as Labour MP for Coventry South in July. She's been temporarily suspended since from her party for voting to scrap a benefit limit, which I will discuss with her in a moment. But Zarah Sultanah joins me now. Zarah Sultanah, thank you for joining me on Mehdi Unfiltered. Why have we seen these far-right riots in recent days? What set them off? Why now? And I wonder, how surprised were you by them? How shocked were you by them?
Well, these racist, Islamophobic, far-right riots haven't come from nowhere. They are a culmination of racist headlines and racist framing by our media and our political class. We have a country that has been completely decimated by Tory austerity and now a cost of living crisis. And we've had people in our media and in our politics who have blamed migrants, they've blamed Muslims to scapegoat them for their failings. And this is a product of that. When we hear the language that is being used in the streets by these far-right thugs, they are using slogans that people in the high offices in the country have used, such as stop the boats, take back control. And when we think about the rhetoric that has come out of Westminster, we've had a former Home Secretary who talked about a refugee invasion, she called it.
Yes.
When we look at how this politics has been legitimised, ITV normalised Nigel Farage by putting him on I'm a Celeb, and we've had BBC Question Time do the same with Nigel Farage as well. And so we need to look at the complicity of our political and our media class in what we're seeing on our streets.
What did you think, you referenced the political class, what did you think of your party leader or former party leader, Prime Minister Keir Starmer's response to the riots? Was it adequate in your view?
I was really disappointed at the start, where there seemed to be a reluctance to call the violence Islamophobic. There's been progress made on that, but the party itself has a real problem when it comes to tackling Islamophobia and anti-Black racism. In 2022, we had a report on the Labour Party's internal processes by Martin Ford, who said that the party had a hierarchy of racism, and later commented on concerns around how Islamophobia and anti-Black racism are dealt with. So as the report highlights, but also my own personal experiences as the youngest Muslim MP, the Labour Party has a long way to go. And when we think about the rhetoric that has also been normalised, this is also by Labour Party politicians. When Jack Straw was leader of the House of Commons, he refused to meet Muslim women who wore the veil. We've had John Ashworth, who lost at the last election, saying that asylum seekers could stay in hotels for the rest of their lives. So this is something that has also become very normalised within Labour Party spaces as well.
Zarah, you had a fiery exchange, I should say, during your interview with Good Morning Britain this week, when you criticised people, including your own party leadership, for not calling these riots Islamophobic. The hosts, I think it's fair to say, were not sympathetic to you. I just want to show a clip of that exchange to you and to our viewers. Let's play that clip.
Keir Starmer, Yvette Cooper and Rishi Sunak over the weekend have all said that...
have they called it Islamophobic and racist?
Why is that language important?
These aren't trivial
They've called it
matters.
racist. Have they called it racist?
These are not trivial matters. We have to...
No, I know. No, I'm sorry. We do have to ask you questions
I
as
wonder,
well.
Zara, what was going through your mind during that exchange? And do you think a Jewish MP who went on television after a synagogue was surrounded by a far-right mob and demanded that be called anti-Semitic, would they have been treated in the way you were as a Muslim woman? Is there a different rule for Muslims in public life?
During that interview, it felt like I was being interrogated as a young Muslim woman of colour, calling what is clear everyone was Islamophobic and racist, and I felt like I was put on trial. Kate Garraway repeatedly questioned me why it was important to use that specific word, and I don't think you'd get people questioning that if it was any other form of racism. And before I could even answer, Ed Balls was interrupting me, and there was this sneering condescension that was my experience throughout the entire segment, and it felt like people on that panel were just outraged or found it really difficult to understand why I thought this form of hate should be called by its proper name. And for me, it was really important to highlight the role the media has played. On that panel, you had Ben Bradshaw, who formerly sat on the advisory council of the Henry Jackson Society, which uses its credibility in Westminster to perpetuate Islamophobia.
Yeah.
Also on that panel, Andrew Pearce, who works for the Daily Mail and GB News, as well as Ed Balls, who set out his leadership pitch in The Guardian, blaming Eastern Europeans for the impact on wages, terms and conditions of too many people. So on that panel itself, it was a case study in the complete complicity of politicians and the media and think tanks in the Islamophobia and anti-migrant rhetoric we're seeing on the streets.
You kind of answered the next question I was going to pose to you, which is how did Islamophobia get so mainstreamed and normalized in the UK? Because it's very easy to blame conservatives and the Daily Mail and GB News and the right, but liberals, Labour, centrists, quote unquote, have been complicit in mainstreaming this stuff.
Absolutely. When we think about racism and we think about Islamophobia, people will show the pictures of the violence that we're seeing, which is targeted, and it is, you know, the images of hotels being set on fire to directly harm asylum seekers. It's Muslim women who are getting their hijabs pulled off. It's Black and brown people being targeted by lynch mobs. And that is the visceral impact of it. But when we look at how it has become normalized, there are people who refuse to combat these right-wing narratives. It is your political pundits who just let Robert Jenrick say that Allahu Akbar should be criminalized, and he just kind of gets away with it and doesn't get challenged at all. So this isn't a working class problem. This is from the top down. The fish rots from the head.
Yeah, the insane to say that Allahu Akbar should be criminalised and people should be arrested for it, but that's Britain today.
And this is someone who wants to be the leader of the Conservative Party.
Probably
this is
why he's saying
who's previously occupied very high office.
It's why he's saying it, because he knows that appeals to his Conservative members. The hashtag two-tier Keir has gone viral in the wake of these riots, accusing the Starmer government of policing far-right riots differently to far-left marches for Palestine. Is there any truth to that argument? How do you respond to that?
Absolutely no truth. This is a conspiracy theory that says that white people face higher levels of policing, a more heavy-handed approach, and it couldn't be further from the truth. The year ending March 2023, for every 1,000 Black people, 24.5 people were stopped and searched, and that is 5.9 for every 1,000 white people. The stats simply don't hold up, and you've got people like Elon Musk who are also perpetuating this conspiracy, and it needs to be called out because that is not true.
What do you make of Elon Musk's interventions? How badly has he and social media platforms incited and amplified some of this violence and hate?
Well, he didn't buy Twitter because it was a good financial decision. He was quite open about that. His investment in Twitter is because he sees it as a platform to spread his ideology. It's the same way billionaire press barons buy newspapers so they can use that form of media to divide and rule, so they can protect their own class interests. And we see how he has used Twitter to amplify anti-migrant rhetoric, anti-trans rhetoric, and he has tried to influence US politics, and now he's also doing it in UK politics.
Finally, last question. You, last month, with 6 other MPs, Labour MPs, were suspended by Keir Starmer from the party for voting to scrap the 2-child benefit cap in the UK, which affects 1.6 million children by limiting welfare payments to their families, to the first 2 children in most families. A Downing Street spokesperson said the decision came, quote, because they rebelled against the King's Speech, that's the Labour Party programme for government, which is a serious matter. Is that a fair argument? Because even if you were taking a principled position, I happen to agree with the position you took, the government does have a right to expect a new government that its MPs who are elected with it support its plan.
Well, we didn't vote against the King's Speech. We voted for an amendment to the King's Speech, which we believe would have made the King's Speech even better, because if the Labour Party is to have a moral mission, surely it should be to eradicate child poverty. And there is widespread consensus on this issue within the Labour Party of the two-child benefit cap being a key driver of child poverty. 11 of the Labour Party's affiliated trade unions support scrapping the two-child benefit cap. This is also TUC policy. The Archbishop of Canterbury backs it, as well as Save the Children. So this isn't a controversial plan. What I struggle with is the lack of urgency around it. We can implement wealth taxes. In fact, over the past 14 years, the wealth of the very richest in our country has gone up threefold. The top 1% own more wealth than 70% of the population. So we could implement this today if we wanted to. So the fact that 300,000 children in the UK are living in avoidable poverty is a political choice, and that's what we were standing up against.
Do you plan to return to the Labour Party? How long is this suspension for?
It's a 6-month suspension that will be reviewed at the end of that period of time. And I'm respecting the process, and I hope that the whip will be restored. But I've been quite clear that I will speak up for my principles, and I will speak up when I think that the party isn't being vocal enough when it comes to racism, Islamophobia, the rights and dignity of the Palestinian people, especially when it comes to complicity of the UK government with arms sales. So I'll carry on doing as I have been.
Zarah, Sultana, thanks for joining us on Mehdi Unfiltered.
Thank you for having me.